welcome to the Bitter Lemon. Today we're finally going to reinforce the shock towers. Now at the very beginning of this series, we've talked about tying them into the inner fenders. In fact, that was one of the reasons why we moved the hood struts from over here to back here, using our neat custom bracket and these fancy Tesla Model 3 hood struts, apparently. We're still probably going to do that, and it is a legit way of giving strength to this entire area. In fact, Opel did this later on the later cars and the later chassis that are based on the same platform. BMW did this on the E30 convertible, so it is a legit way of giving strength to this entire area. And we're going to need that strength on the driver's side. The inner fender has actually, in this corner, has actually fatigued and cracked. We've now welded that back up, so it's not a problem, but obviously we need to give this place some strength. Years and years of use, and I'm sure the racing hasn't helped kind of do a number on these really known to be reasonably weak chassis. So all the better that we're going to reinforce it. Now in a previous video, I've also given good motivation for why it makes sense to tie the shock towers into the cage, and that's what we're going to do today. The reason why I was reluctant at doing that in the first place was that the geometry of this chassis really doesn't lend itself to that very easily, and well, it's not like we have anything else going on right now, so we may as well do it properly, right? The reason why this chassis doesn't really lend itself easily to it, unlike some of the other cars like the E30s and so on, is the placement of the shock tower and the sheet metal around it, in particular this area right here. So if we were to imagine, I've cut a hole in this bulkhead to kind of give us some idea of where to route the cage tube that we want to use in order to reinforce this. I've also actually cut the wall between the scuttle area here and the engine bay. There was a wall. I've cut that off, folded the edge over to give it a little bit of strength, but that really has provided us with a lot of working room and a lot of light. So that's good. But if we were to imagine this jack handle were the cage tube that we wanted to route, and we wanted to sort of line it up roughly with where the cage is, it would probably end up being routed like this, and it would basically have to penetrate this corner here where 3 or 4 different panels meet. And very obviously it's a structural corner. We have the firewall, we have the inner fender, we have the scuttle panel, and those are, given that this corner is already reasonably weak, as we've seen from the other side, I really did not want to mess with it. It also sounds like a giant pain in the butt. So it was clear that we wanted to stay on the inside of this corner, so that's why I've made the cut the way I've made it. And I've probably made it a little bit too large, and that's fine, we can plate over the rest. So if I were to take my jack handle mock-up again and try to kind of route it from the cage down bar, roughly where the door bar, opposite the door bar, because that's the node with the most strength. If I were to route it like this, we could maybe make the incision a little deeper, and then it would maybe hit the shock tower here. But the bigger problem of a straight run like this is that it's almost a tangent to the shock tower, and it basically needs the shock tower way on the outside. And that might be okay, but the problem is actually not on the passenger side, but on the driver's side. This entire area is taken up by the brake booster, and I am not prepared to re-engineer the brake booster at this point, or actually preclude any kind of reasonable brake booster solution in the future if we were to develop this car in any way. So I've kind of given myself the task of kind of retaining the original brake booster geometry there, so we have to work around that. That really means we have to put a bend in it. We have to come straight out here and then be as tight and parallel to the inner fender as we can, and that way we can also hit the shock tower basically bang in the middle here in the back. So that's what we're going to do. And the first thing that I did after basically having decided on the route was make a mock-up in wire. Very easy to work with, and it gives me the idea of basically how long this thing would have to be and roughly the angle. So if we imagine this were the center line of whatever tube, I can put this in and basically again line it up with the back of one of the door bars and then basically make sure it's centered right here and has enough clearance as if it were a large tube. And then we see it basically hits the center point of the back of the shock tower there. So this then gave me roughly essentially the angle and the length, and from there on out I was able to build a mock from scrap cage tube, basically taking a piece that was already bent, cutting it roughly where the angle matched, and you can see it basically replicates. It is now a full-size replica of my wire mock, so then I was able to essentially get that, fiddle with it, and get it to the length and the geometry where I need it, and hold it in place. And now I have a really good idea of how this is going to get routed, and it of course also allowed me to finesse these holes a little bit more. And so yeah, so we're roughly lined up with the back of the door bar here on the cage, yeah, you see also that the hole is a little bit too large. Again, not a problem, we'll plate over it, and we're going to hit the cage, we're going to hit the strut tower roughly at the back of the center line here. So that's great, which means given this mock-up now, we just need to find a straight piece of cage tube and then put this bend in it.
Time to fire up the old hydraulic tubing bender, which works surprisingly quickly. Et voila!
And here's the finished article. We've also fish-mouthed the end that will go onto the down bar of the cage tube, and we can now fit that. Again, hit the other side of the door bar, and with a little bit of finessing of this corner, this will work really well. On this end, of course, we just have a straight cut. We need to leave a little bit of space for a spreader plate, which we will want, just like with any other cage installation, even though this is probably much stronger than some of the other pieces of sheet metal where we've installed the cage. It's still a good idea to spread the load. We want to use 1/8 inch spreader plate, 3mm time honored tradition. I didn't film this. It's not that difficult. Basically take a cardboard template, cut out the template to the point where it fits, then transfer it to some plate and cut out the plate. The added difficulty on this one, of course, is that we need to shape. We want to get the plate to be as close as possible to the shape of the shock tower, and it's a little bit of a compound curve. What I always like to do is find scrap pieces of metal that you can use as an anvil, and for these kinds of diameters and radiuses, what I find works best is old brake rotors, or sometimes also cam gears, those kinds of things. Find something that is the right diameter, and so in this case I used a brake rotor, and you kind of have like different kinds of sizes of brake rotors. The hat is one diameter, and then the outer disc is another, and so you can kind of work your way and work the metal with a big hammer. So that's what we've got. So with the spreader plate fabricated, we're gonna now weld it on.
For this, we're going to use the time-honored tradition of tack and whack. I tacked the plate against the shock tower in 2 places already where it had good fitment. From there, we can work our way out and whack the plate with a big hammer to make it conform to the shock tower as best as possible. And then we weld a little bit more, and so on. I'll spare you the rest of the welding footage where my hands and the gun obstruct most of the view. Once the spreader plate is in place, we can weld the cage tube in. My hands are going to be in the way of any interesting footage here as well, unfortunately, so we'll just fast forward to the finished article. Of course, I also welded the other side of the tube to the cage, but that would have been even more difficult to film, so you'll just have to take my word for it. However, we're not really entirely finished here in the engine bay, since there is still a big hole between the engine bay and the passenger compartment. Let's fill that in. I'm using some more scrap sheet metal from one of our previous engine donors for this. First, we'll strip the paint off a large area. This is much easier to do at this stage when you're working with a big piece of sheet metal than when you're dealing with a small patch. Next, we'll use the cardboard template that I've created from the hole and mark out the sheet metal. The angle grinder is deployed to do a rough cutout. And then another angle grinder is deployed to do the detail work and to prep the edges. Clean metal is key for a good weld. Once again, we'll deploy the tack and whack method to get the patch to conform to the hole it's supposed to fill. And as with previous metal patchwork, we'll successively weld around the gap, moving around as to not put too much heat into a single place all at once. We're almost done. There's just one more small patch to make, and this one happens in much the same way. Cardboard template, angle grinder, another angle grinder, and finally some tack and whack. So, after much welding, cleaning up, some spray paint, and some reassembly, this is what the driver's side looks like. This was the tricky side, since we wanted to stay out of the brake booster's way. And while we were here, we also welded up that crack. And here's the passenger side. That's it, really. We finally reinforced the shock towers. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you for watching this video about the bitter lemon, and remember to subscribe our channel.